Any new organization needs to immediately do a security training to their all employees. I think of AI along the same lines, meaning it can be good, but it can certainly be bad.
Great to have you on, and you're probably one of the best people. Just to give Harshith a little intro of who you are, you're probably one of the smartest, I would say, defenders in terms of like the fintech world, in terms of like protecting people and startups, and like almost like I would say a thought leader, honestly, that a lot of people don't know about the way you think about just fintech and the way that things are moving and how fraud works in this industry and all of that sort of thing. Um, so I guess just to kick things off, maybe Harshith, you could just do a quick intro of who you are, and then we could start to just jump into questions.
So, hey there, Anthony. It's just amazing to meet you. So I'm Harshit, and I'm actually doing podcast and as an evangelist at JustPaid. But previously, I've exited my own small AI startup and also was at Web3 as a consultant and a community manager. So yeah, just excited about the podcast here. So that's a bit about myself.
Well, nice to meet you. And JustPaid is just amazing, as you no doubt know.
Yeah.
So I guess just to start off, like we usually just go through like your history, and again, this is like an open-ended conversation. So I think we usually just go peep through like history of like who you are and like where and how you got into, fintech. I think one thing that I noticed about you is like you lived in Silicon Valley your whole life. So it gives you an abnormal advantage to like see all of these startups growing. And, a lot of people are outside Silicon Valley, so they don't see like the open AIs of the world grow to become what they've become. But you actually have privy to that. And also seeing all of the fintech and like being in the industry, I think you have an abnormal advantage just understanding like the world that we live in. But I guess like where did you grow up? Like tell us like how you even like got into like startups and like in this world of fintech and startups.
How much time do you have? I'll try to keep it succinct, but I am sort of a man of such meandering. I'm originally from Southern California. Grew up pretty much near Palm Springs, but we all just say, "Oh yeah, near LA." Came up here for college. I had the distinct privilege and luck of getting into Stanford, and so that was my immediate introduction to Silicon Valley. Having previously never given thought to the word or the area. I will just say this: many of the people that I went to school with at that time, they are people who are movers and shakers now in this realm. Hint, hint. Particularly one that does OpenAI. So these are people that introduced me to this world. I mean, it was around you, even if it was a simple class of creative writing. One of my classmates happened to be this person who was already starting his own technology company there, and so pretty much it was inescapable being at Stanford, being surrounded by tons of people who are just in the space. At that time, it was a big deal to be hired by Google when you got graduated. I remember my freshman year was the first year that Facebook had launched at Stanford itself, when it was nowhere else besides Harvard and MIT. So I remember those early days. So technically, I'm one of the first groups of people to be on Facebook. And when I graduated, I actually thought I was completely do something else. I was doing politics and sort of advocacy work. And then just one day, I decided to, make more of a career and just kind of threw myself out there, went on AngelList, and then I found a technology startup, and that's how I actually got into it. I didn't really take that dip until 2016. So basically, that's a big 6-year, 7-year gap out of college where I didn't get into the space until then. But when I did, it was something that I really enjoyed, that I found myself really excelling faster than I thought I would pretty quickly. And it was great. And so frankly, it was just customer service at first for a technology startup. And I somehow got tapped to say, "Hey, we have this issue with fraud. Can you take a look and figure it out and see what you can do?" And literally I was thrown, baptism by fire. Turned out I was pretty darn good at it. And so that's basically history right there. So I've been basically in fintech since then, since 2016. And I now consult for many technology companies in terms of their fraud and their compliance and their KYC processes, mainly with the thought in mind of how can we efficiently address fraud and risk, taking into account friction and customer journeys, and you don't want drop off, while at the same time you want to get your bang for your buck in terms of mitigating losses, and how can we design a system that makes sense for us, because fraud and risk is not one size fits all. It's always unique to the context by which any company is operating. And so that's where I'm at today.
Is there something that happened in your workspace that you actually like found your calling, I'd say, in fraud detection itself? Because like fintech is like a big space. So why fraud detection specifically?
Having come from the world of politics, which is not something that can exactly get you a job very easily in terms of what, on a resume, I just took a simple customer service role in 2016 for a financial technology startup that was just getting off the ground. And so at first it was pretty straightforward. I was just, answering the emails and the chats and trying to learn about the system as fast as I could in order to provide effective support. But since it's a startup and it was only about 5 or 6 people, I was one of the first 5. Basically, the CEO just comes over to my desk one day and says, "Hey, we have an issue here. We're basically losing money. We didn't really fully anticipate how we can actually account for all this fraud that we're seeing now, and all these returns and all these losses." Just a quick back up for one more second, our little meandering trip here. I see it all the time where startups are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. That's kind of the whole thing about a startup, is they're so full of hope, and they're so eager to grow, that oftentimes they kind of get ahead of themselves and they kind of don't see those stumbling blocks that are inevitable. They're going to be there. They're going to trip up, and you still have to keep that hopeful, positive vision. And so I see all the time someone launches a new service, a new product, a new financial payment system, and they get hit with fraud because they're thinking more about, we've built this really cool system and people are going to love it, people are going to come on, and then they fail to think though about the bad actors out there that are targeting you. And so basically CEO says, "Hey, we don't have a lot of people here who can deal with this, and why don't you take a stab? We don't know, maybe you might be good at it." And it turns out, stroke of luck or whatever it may be, I just happened to take a look, learned pretty quickly, figure out the patterns, what was going on. Data to me tells a story, so I was able to piece together exactly what someone was doing, what their tactics were, what they look like, and I was able to very quickly cut all those losses. And then over time, of just dealing with the daily weeds, so to speak, in terms of getting granular, was able to self-learn fraud and risk, and the rest is history. So obviously I had become more formalized later down the line in terms of compliance, certifications, and so forth. But basically, I was just a simple guy at the desk answering emails, who I was told, "Hey, take a look, see what you can do," and it just made sense to me. In fact, it was fun. If anything, I think the real reason why I succeeded is because I was animated to do so. Because it's like that quote from Moneyball. It may not be a direct quote, but it makes sense to me in terms of the mentality, and that is, I like to win, but I hate losing more. And for some reason, when it comes to fraud, I take it personal, and I hate when we lose money. I'm so motivated by that so much that I want to ruin that fraudster's day, that I get joy from denying them that opportunity, that pleasure. And that makes my day. And so every day I'm animated by that. So when I get into the weeds and look at data, every time I get in a situation where I'm like, I gotcha, I feel good. And so that I think is what really helped me in terms of finding my stride when it came to fraud and risk.
I guess it kind of is all hands on deck, where a lot of people are doing a lot of different things and figuring out things as they go. Going backtracking a little bit, you went to Stanford University, and for everyone listening, Stanford is I would say one of the places where just brilliant people are coming out all of the time. You have the founders of Yahoo. I think it was the founders of Yahoo, founders of
Jerry.
Google. So many founders that come out of Stanford, whether they fully graduate or not, they just go there, and there's this mindset from that school. You jumped into this startup, you started doing fraud, working on fraud. What is it about that school? Why that school? Because the whole world has schools all over it, right? It's something about that school specifically, really fosters a lot of entrepreneurial thinking. And I think honestly, when I first met you, you were very much an entrepreneurial thinker. What from that school did you take away that you brought out into the startup that you worked at, that you work, and all the startups you work at?
Great, and I'm glad you think so highly of that school and the people who go there and who come out of it. Um, with all due respect to modesty, I'm very happy that I got to go to that school. Um, I certainly don't see myself on the same caliber as a lot of the other people who come out of there who are just freaking amazing. And I'm just happy to have actually met them and to learn from them. And I think they made me better. But I will say, trying to be as modest as possible, what I think Stanford does a really good job at is they find people. There are two qualities, I think. Number one, they find people with a drive, people who want to go above and beyond, that it's not about just hitting this benchmark and then calling it a day. They want to push that benchmark farther. They want to take it to the fullest, humanly possible place to take it. So they look for drive. And so a lot of schools do that as well. So that's one thing, but it's not the most determinative factor in terms of how someone's going to be. But you combine that, I think, with people who are curious and flexible. I think those are the two other qualities that you put them together. So you got drive, and I think it's that curiosity and flexibility. And so I can use my simple example, and I'm just a simple person who came from Stanford. And like I said, I was in politics. I didn't really do much with a career, so to speak, at that point until I went to this financial startup. I was just doing simple support, but I was flexible in terms of wearing those different hats, flexible in terms of how I was looking at things, using different perspectives and different experiences, and figuring things out. I think that is a good combination for most people who come out of Stanford or any other school and they're super successful. It's drive and flexibility. And then this from startups, you're not going to always succeed right away. So if you don't know how to pivot, you don't know how to be flexible. If you are not curious enough to read what's coming or possibly coming or thinking along new lines, bringing in new perspectives, new people, being very diverse in how you approach a problem, you're probably not going to do well if you give it right away. It requires that drive and flexibility. So that's what I think is the main quality of a lot of the people I went to school with.
It's just like when you put all these smart people in a single cohort, it's just like a lot of great things happen. And I just look at this as like asymmetry of information, and it's actually about the kind of people that you're with, the kind of ideas that you're discussing. And don't you also think it's a little bit of like a luck surface area which Stanford and Silicon Valley provides? Because one of the things that actually Daniel told me was, when I do these interviews, I get to meet amazing people, right? I just get to learn a lot. So, is that something similar happening here as well in Silicon Valley or Stanford per se? That there's certain sets of people that you're bringing together, and it's just like ideas are popping up so quickly, and then the rest of the world catches up. Am I like right in this analogy, or like what do you think?
So what comes to my mind, what I see is basically we created a self-feedback loop here in a good way, where we brought in sort of the precursor materials in terms of maybe the small cadre of students, of people attracted to Stanford, and they are so that precursor of all these amazing diverse perspectives and ideas that bounce off each other and mold and are flexible in terms of how things fit together. And they take on these new things that are completely different from the way the normal standardized thought used to be. And then they create these successful things, and it attracts people here. And you get to the point where now we're on the map in Silicon Valley. We're attracting the best of the best from all over the world, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so basically, it's that self-feedback loop. It just took that initial seed of the right combination of drive and flexibility and curiosity and diverse viewpoints and seeing things that how they could be as opposed to the way that they are, or instead of approaching things from the way that things used to be seen. I think that's kind of what happened. It's just building off of that curiosity, which then attracted more and more people, and then now we are pretty much the preeminent place to be in the entire world in terms of attracting ideas and that entrepreneurial spirit that other places try to emulate. It's great, but still people come here and it just grows off of that more and more and more.
Naval Ravikant, he's a really famous entrepreneur in the area. He actually moved to Silicon Valley, and he brought up that he wouldn't have been as successful if he wasn't in this area. So just being around the startups and being around that energy, he learned a lot. So like, I guess for you, Anthony, it was being around that energy. You learned a lot, probably at like an accelerated rate. But I guess, Stanford, there was a lot of, what's funny is Stanford, give or take around 2005 and onward, I think Y Combinator really started to come around that area as well.
Mhm.
Did you feel that at all, or was that like not a big thing in that? I guess it was a small thing way back then. Like probably started getting bigger later, or did you hear about it like when you were in school, or not so much?
So I'm hesitant to reveal everything, but I will say that the person um, I met in my creative writing class who introduced me to a lot of interesting thinking. He's just a fantastic connector of people and ideas. He's just an amazing human being and incredibly brilliant, probably the most brilliant person I ever met. Happened to be one of those people who went on and was one of the head people for Y Combinator and something to do with AI later down the line. So yeah, because of him and because of all the people around me that were just doing all these amazing things, um, it was pretty pronounced on campus that there was certainly a huge bent towards technology and startups, and that the next big best thing could be coming out of Stanford, and that anyone on the campus, because they're exposed to all these different ideas, can come up with any idea and go out there, and if it's good enough, and if they want it enough, and they are willing enough, can make something happen. And so I think that is sort of something that is hard to escape on that campus because I'm not technical at all. You know, I am not a hard science kind of person. Definitely what they call a fuzzy on campus, right? You have techies and fuzzies. I was a fuzzy, but even as a fuzzy, and even fuzzies on campus, they're exposed to this idea, and anybody could come up with a great idea and take it far at Stanford. And so that was sort of the ethos on campus, was that look, this is where it can happen. So if you want it and you want to make it happen, there are the resources, there are the people, there are the connections. This is the one place where anyone can make it happen. And that was sort of the ethos.
It's I think it's just funny how you mentioned the fuzzies and the techies, and I think now in the age of AI, just with cursor and all the innovation that's happening with code, I think all fuzzies can also be techies, right? Like, what
Oh
do you think
yeah,
of that?
I cheat now, so I like to pretend like I'm very smart and make people think that I am. But like I'm very aware of all kinds of these different statistical methods that we use, especially in the field when you're doing data analysis. But sometimes I can't do them myself, or maybe I don't want to take the time to really painstakingly do it. And so, like now, all the time, I just take data dumps and I start throwing in, constructing. I'll tell Claude AI or Chat GPT or whatever the case may be. They can all do it. I'll say, hey, can you do a Monte Carlo simulation for me? Here are the variables. Here's what I want to look at, and then boom. So before, could I do that? No. I don't have the tools to necessarily do it myself unless I wanted to take some time to study, which I could do, but do I have the time? No. But now with AI, I could do lots of things, and I don't necessarily have to be all that techy to do it.
Got it, got it. So, can you also double click on this concept of using AI in fraud detection? Because now we're actually using it for research, for analytics. But can you use AI in your workflow for more nuanced tasks? And the kick that you mentioned that you get, gotcha. You're not gonna take money away from me, and I know what's going on here. So can you get that movement using AI? Is it possible to do that?
Oh yeah, and I'm not that advanced in terms of employing AI all the time for various things. I'm still kind of old school because the way my mind works is I want to know what I'm doing and why. And maybe I still have a bias, to be honest, that where I think that I'm going to see things that AI may not, which is not true. AI actually can be incredible in terms of the really hidden things that can be found in terms of relationships that the human brain may overgloss. Uh, but I still like to do a lot of things myself in terms of I just like to look at data and I just like to find the relationships, the patterns, the things that just kind of stick out. The data tells a story. So I think when you have a strong narrative to and how to look at the data, or the data make the narrative for you as you look at it, it's very powerful. But AI is certainly a lot more sophisticated, and so I work with a lot of other providers that employ various ML or AI, but usually MLs, where they're just finding all the variables that are related to a certain a degree of confidence amongst all events where you've tagged them as fraud, and you can learn from it. And as more events happen, more data, it gets more and more refined, and it can find all these very simple types of rules that you can then now employ to detect fraud. And it's pretty damn impressive, actually. Like, I thought I was pretty, I had to humble myself. I thought it was pretty brilliant in terms of the stuff that I was finding and doing. And it turns out AI and ML, if you train it to the right data sets over time, will find things that you never could. And it's amazing. The one thing, though, I'm not for sure, because I'm not that advanced when it comes to using these AI tools and models, is when I'm doing fraud detection and I'm doing data analysis, I'm just not looking at, here's what I can catch now based off of what has happened. I'm looking at in terms of okay, this is what they were doing. Now, what are they going to do next? What is the logical line of thinking here? If this was their tactic that they're taking now, if I preempt that, and as soon as they learn from feedback over time, whether it's immediate or down the line, they figure out, okay, this is the variable that they were detecting. How are they going to adapt to get around it? And can AI predict in advance some other way that they will try to come at the same problem? I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't have a doubt, but I like to think that I'm pretty good at finding a pattern, finding a tactic, and predicting and preempting the various other tactics that they might employ after that tactic gets discovered. I like to think like they do. And as a result, I'll think ahead. And so therefore, when they go, and oftentimes I validate it, I'm right. I'm like, yes, I definitely got you in advance, where they will employ the tactic that I predicted. And boom, I got them before they can do it. And it's pretty awesome and it feels good. So can AI do it? I'm pretty sure. But I'm not that experienced yet with using predictive AI as much as using AI to detect existing patterns in relationships.
I mean, there may be exploits out there that are unknown to AI even. Like, I actually heard about an exploit with like physical checks. So there was an exploit that was fairly recent with bank accounts. So basically, a fraudster would find someone with a real account and then have them scan a fake check, and then, or some type of check, and then the bank would basically approve it, have the money move into the account. Now, what happened, fraudsters were able to like move money very quickly doing this exploit to companies like, I think, yeah, the big guys. I don't want to name names, but a lot of them had this exploit happen to them fairly recently. You could Google it, the devil's in the details of like how they were doing it. But like, if AI never saw that, it may not be as sophisticated. It may have to see it first for the first time to really understand what it is. Like humans could be like, wait, this exploit is happening.
Exactly.
Let's patch it. Like, let's have a maximum amount you could put in, which is like 10,000 or 20,000 or something like that. And then the humans will fix that exploit, and then AI would learn from that. I don't know. It's going to be fun to see like how well AI is going to like become part of this and like help protect us. Would you say it's primarily humans running the fraud teams at a large banks and in industry, or is it more AI today?
From what I understand, the banks are a bit slower to the scene when it comes to employing technology, and particularly AI, but some of them are doing it. But they still, by and large, rely on old school models of just different hierarchies of different people who get triggers and look at things and investigate. It's a very slow process. They're very reactive rather than preemptive. And that's just that model. With technology, you can be a lot more preemptive, whether that's because you yourself are leveraging rules that you develop from experience from other places and from over time, and adding new rules being predictive, or AI is doing that for you. And so at the bank level, I'm unsure just how much they're leveraging AI or how they're leveraging it, but I do know some of the bigger banks are certainly investing a lot in not only financial technology companies, but also fraud detection platforms that use AI. And there's a lot of those partnerships going on. And so I have no doubt that a lot of the banks are doing it. But if you got some small little credit union, they're probably still using legacy platform providers and the built-in rules there. And I'm consulting for a company now, and I'm looking at the system that they're using that's used by a big provider for a lot of the smaller banks. And it is just it's just old school archaic, where they're just based off of these out of the box rules, and you just get these alerts, and they're not very sophisticated at all. It works from the perspective of regulatory compliance in terms of BSA, but does it work from the perspective of being very sophisticated when it comes to fraud and risk. No. And so, yeah, we'll see how quickly they adapt. It certainly, to me, makes no sense to not be leveraging these platforms, especially with ML and AI. Maybe cost and scale is a factor, but these things are way better than people from what I've seen so far. And I certainly use them where I think in conjunctions, like Captain Planet, our powers combined. If I can shed modesty for a second there, it's a powerful combination when you have people who can see things a little differently, see the trends, and employ AI correctly to aid them. It's a fantastic combination of being able to mitigate risk.
So you're saying the large banks are very slow to adopt technology. I do feel like technology is moving at such a rapid pace
Mhm.
that there'll be really good exploits that will get through a lot of like their fraud teams, I'm assuming. Like I'll give you an example that like I think is a little scary is voice AI is getting to a point where like you can't detect the difference between a human and AI. If someone was to gather people's voices, they could literally convince a phone provider to, give a cell phone over or something like that to the fraudster, and then the fraudster could convince the bank
Yeah.
that they are who they are. There's a lot of these like really loose exploits out there that I think are like moving so fast now. It's really
That's a
scary.
new generation of fraud now.
Yeah.
It's still going to always happen. Your bread and butter type of fraud attacks, in terms of phishing and compromised accounts, and or people who are fraudulently open up new accounts and trying to send money that's not supported. Those things are your bread and butter basic fraud. Those will still happen, but AI and a lot of these fraud detection tools, when used correctly, can pretty much almost eliminate those, if not mitigate them to such a minimal thing to not even consider anymore. The new frontier, which is scary as hell, because AI works both ways. It's an arms race in terms of, can we, on the side of the financial technology providers and the banks, utilize AI to help protect our businesses, to protect our customers, to protect the bottom line. And fraudsters are also rushing to see how they can use AI, generative AI in particular, to completely disrupt all this. So you see every day, like for the past few years, I've been following, someone posted how they use generative AI to create a verification photo for Reddit. And that's very basic though, but that's just a photo. And it was pretty easy. And I was like aware for a while, like that's going to be something very scary that's going to happen, because traditionally someone would have to Photoshop. And there are ways you can detect that Photoshop in terms of, in-house, we try to think that we're smart, and we would create like a Gaussian blur and deconstruct and reconstruct and compare. And you can kind of see when someone Photoshopped, besides just looking with the naked eye, because sometimes you don't know it when you don't see it. But with generative AI, that's going to be a lot more difficult. And so then you saw things change from where it used to be, where passively you would receive identification, or would say, give me a selfie with an ID, because that'd be harder to fake, but those can now be faked. To now you're going to, a lot of these technologies are employing liveness checks. Some of the more advanced companies will employ it this way, where instead of you just uploading your ID, instead you're going through a platform to use your phone to take a photo of your ID and also take a selfie, and it's all recorded, so you can't actually easily fake it. But at the same time, we're not that far away from that being able to be faked if you're able to intercept the signals and employ a program. Because now there's the new latest one that's like that Reddit photo verification moment, where someone is able to go online and have it live generative AI filter on his face, where he can look like Sam Altman or he can look like Elon Musk. So basically, it's an arms race of who can stay in front of who, and just kind of detecting in advance, like, what is the next course, the logical course that they're going to try to use generative AI for, and what are the ways that we can actually, disrupt those practices. And so right now, the biggest frontier of fraud is a lot of social engineering, because that's difficult to detect. So real person, real account, doing something with their money, and they're being defrauded. Hard to detect, because I'm that person. It's my account. I enter the MFA. This is authorized, but I'm being scammed by external party. Maybe I'm romance scammed. That is like the new frontier of fraud that's hard to detect. That's the social engineering. And a lot of it is also then the compromising accounts and utilizing, generative AI to fool KYC. And those are, I think, the two biggest frontiers of fraud right now, in the financial sector. You can kind of find some telltale signs, but you're still going to have a lot of false positives. So how much resources you want to dedicate at scale as well to verify with these people, and you also don't want to have undue friction and inconveniencing your customers, but yet you want to protect them. And so it's a conundrum of what is the best way to detect and to respond to these cases. And some of the banks, I know they're changing now because I know they had some hearings in Washington, and they're changing policies where now the banks are more liable now for these, where before they used to say, well, you authorized it, you did it, even though you're a scam, but it had nothing to do with us. And that may or may not be correct, but that was the mindset. They're starting to change now, where they're starting to realize that, yes, even though Harshit, it's your fault that you got scammed, we're not responsible for it. They're starting to realize, okay, we have to do a better job, though, of protecting you, especially because some of these new types of payment platforms, there's no recourse. They go against all the traditional types of payment methods that have protections, like it's Nacho or the cardable brands. Those are consumer protection laws. They're there, Regulation E. When it comes to Zelle, there's no recourse protection whatsoever, none. So if you got scammed and sent Zelle, it's done. It's gone. There's no recourse. There's no clawback. There's no policies, no nothing. And that's what's scary now. And so the banks are getting a lot of pressure for them to have to admit and to say that, hey, we need to do a better job of helping you protect yourself.
I actually just keep getting so many emails from Daniels saying, "Hey, I need $200 gift card. One of our employee needs it," and I just sent it to Daniel on Slack. It's like, no, that wasn't me. Just ignore those emails, right? So in that case, how do you actually train your employees and customers to recognize and avoid these type of scams? Because I know it because I actually come from Web3 space, so I've seen so many meme coins and what they call shit coins and so many scams. So I have this, I think I've developed this muscle of finding those scams when I immediately see it. So is there a way we can train our employees in that case?
Oh, in that case, this is something very simple. You don't need AI for this. Any new organization, bottom line, needs to immediately do a security training to their all employees. And this is one of the topics that has to be covered, because this is where a fraud scam is easy to do, just shotgunning across the internet. And what they do is they'll follow your company on LinkedIn. They'll know whenever there's a new employee. And with everything online these days, it's not hard. If I can probably search your information, I can find out your address and your phone number and email pretty easily. And when I do that, all it takes is, okay, I know you work for JustPaid, and Daniel is one of the head honchos there. So great, I have your number. I know that you're new because you posted on LinkedIn. I'm going to text you, say, hey, Daniel, I'm in a meeting right now. I can't do anything right now, but I need your favor. I want to do something nice for the employees. Can you go to the store nearby and get 10 gift cards? And I know it's because this happened to an employee at our company back in 2020. And I felt so bad for this particular customer or this particular employee. And so we strengthened our protocols to let people know that certain kind of requests, first of all, you should know it when you see it. We won't ask for certain things, but always find a way to verify, authenticate whether or not this is really that person. Whether it's email, look at the actual email, not just the name that comes in. That's a very easy one to fool people. You get these phone numbers, these calls and texts pretty much within a week after you've been hired, and it's all the same thing. And so, unless you pre-warn your employees, unless you enable your employees to be able to recognize how they may be scammed, they're all going to be victims. They're going to find out too late. And so I think it's incumbent upon any organization to properly train their new employees at the start, so that way this doesn't happen, because it happens. And the bottom line is now texts and emails are incredibly polluted to the point where they're almost useless now. They're not secure ways to communicate, just because of how easy they are to get hacked, and how easy it is to look up your information and how to spoof. And unless people are really trained to know what to look for, and sometimes you're in a situation where you're not looking at it because you don't need to, and that's how you get fooled. Even I can fall victim, where you just make a lazy assumption. So it all starts with just security training and awareness and the tactics. It doesn't matter how amazingly brilliant or smart a person is. It's no comment on anyone who gets scammed. It happens to everybody. And so, we have to protect our employees, protect our organizations by employing that security training and awareness right away. And that has nothing to do with being sophisticated when it comes to AI or anything else. No, that's just common sense to let people know, because you've seen it happen before, it's going to happen again. So therefore, it is your responsibility to let your new employees know that, hey, this may happen to you. Here's how you can be smart and make sure it doesn't. So I feel passionate about that, because it's such a basic thing, but it happens every day. It's amazing.
Are hackers going more after businesses, these fraudsters, or are they going more after individuals? Like what's an easier target? Like, I guess, you go after like the S&P 500, you would just assume that their security is really good. I hope. But individuals, you get someone. I got a letter in the mail actually, and it actually said something very very scary on it, and I sent it to my realtor, and they were basically like, "That is fraud." Then I Googled it, and I realized it looked like almost a legal document. It looked like the government had sent this, but it wasn't the government because it was on the web, and it basically was just fraud. I'm like, wow, they are getting smart. They're mailing people
Oh yeah.
like as one individual. There's one point of failure. You could just get the person. Like, you may not know the answer to this. Like, are they going more after individuals? Or are they going after companies? The one thing you do bring up is new companies are victims. It's what you're saying is like they're very, very
Bright eyed
new.
and
They're
bushy tails.
excited.
Boom. Looking from the outside in and sort of inductively kind of learning what's going on in the ecosystem, I have a sense of it might make more sense that they're targeting more businesses, individuals at the businesses as opposed to individuals. But I don't know it to be true. I would just say that the payoff though is bigger. And I'll tell you the biggest, easiest scam. Because first of all, people are the weaknesses, right? So an organization could have security, but it just takes one person to make mistakes. That's the weak point in any organization is just human nature, human flaws, and it happens. But the biggest, easiest thing that can happen is this is super common. This I saw a huge surge when the pandemic came on. People, like I said, emails and phone numbers, all that stuff's polluted now. There's not a lot of trust in it, but emails in particular are just so easily hacked every day. And emails are exposed in terms of database breaches, and those are used then to also then phish and to target people and whatnot all the time as well. And so once they get your email, so say if you work for a company, what they'll do is they'll hit the jackpot. Either the social engineer to get someone to get compromised, or they get lucky and they're somehow able to compromise that person. They get the email, but usually they're targeted in some way that they don't know. So then I get your email, and then all of a sudden I can look in that email. I can do a few things that are pretty sophisticated. Wouldn't say sophisticated, but it's pretty smart, and people don't notice something so simple. They'll go to your settings and they'll put filters in, go to the trash, so they can do stuff with your email, and you will never know because the responses will never get in your inbox. Who goes to the email and looks at their filters? No one. So that's what they can do undetected. They wait, they study, they look at all the emails that come in, look at the history, and then they find opportunities. So the biggest one that happened that I've seen so much in the past 4 years is grow so much, millions and millions of dollars just off of a handful of businesses that I happen to be privy to, where let's say you have a vendor that you pay. That vendor, that email gets compromised. They email you. Classic, very simple scam. Nothing sophisticated here other than the social engineering that went into getting that email. Email me and say, hey, we actually got a new bank account. Can you update it? Now, one would think that if you're in an AP department, that you're professional and that these are rules and you would understand to never ever do that. But some people just do it. Like, oh yeah, I know this guy, John Doe. I talk to him all the time. Sure, no problem. Let me update it. Well, guess what? You now just updated a bank account that does not belong to your vendor. So when you go to pay it, you're paying out tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes way more, to not that business. And then you don't find out till 30 days or more later. And it just becomes a big headache. And it happens all the time. Number one, organizations need to have strong AP procedures and realize that never, ever, 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 ever update bank account details because of an email. Have protocols in place to authenticate any requests. I saw that like jump up so much since 2020, 2021. And at one point, just from a handful of businesses, it was over $1.9 million lost over time. And luckily, because of my connections at the different banks, I was able to quickly act and recover most of it. But that's just insane. And it's something very simple. It is not something, very advanced or sophisticated. It's just social engineering. And if they target the right person, get the right email account, and then boom, so much money can be had by using that email in the right way.
Now I'm just like thinking like a fifth grader, and I have a question here. So, in Web3, when you immediately create your wallet, it prompts that you have to write your seed phrase on paper, right? Because anywhere else you might lose it, or it's just easier to hack. So what do you think of, just going full analog and having some critical information just memorized, or, having it written in paper? Or like, is there a possibility, like, is this something that people do? Is this secure? Or what's your take on this?
It's very basic. Nothing's secure. or even something that is more secure or can be theoretically secure can be very insecure if not properly handled or some crazy edge case happens. So it really just comes down to managing risk and being as smart as possible given the resources and the context, if that makes any sense. I know it's a very broad answer because, yeah, writing on paper means that you now have your password and it is safe from these internet hackers and being exposed in a database breach or getting in the wrong hands. But at the same time, maybe you're cleaning up and you accidentally throw it in the trash, and maybe it happens to be someone who's smart enough to go through trash cans and finds it, or maybe someone in your own house, maybe friendly fraud, maybe you have a kid who really wants to get those Robux. I have kids and they'd love to ask me every day, Daddy, can I have $10 for Robux? And so they'll get that and maybe they can use it. So you basically are just shifting the risk, and nothing is 100% secure. And anything can be fooled. Anything can have a weakness. It's just about how do you manage it. And so for me, like, I think it's perfectly fine to use, Google Chrome is pretty secure in terms of the authentication it takes to be able to get into your browser. Store your passwords there, or you can use an external provider like Bitwarden or so forth. But at the same time, what if I'm at a cafe and I walk away to go use the restroom and maybe I leave my laptop open? So even though I have the secure method of storing my passwords, someone can buy and just simply access it. So that's why, I don't like to think of absolutes. Anything could be broken. It's just all about how you manage it and where those risks and vulnerabilities shift.
I was actually just looking at recent data, and I see that there is this kind of connection between an economic downturn or high unemployment and the increase in fraud. So, while working in the industry for so long, um, have you seen any motivations of, the fraudster? Are there any motivation, like certain set of motivation? Is it just economic motivation where they just want to extract as much money out of a fintech startup, or are there different kind of motivation? I'm just trying to dig into
I
the
see.
human behavior of the fraudster, because you mentioned you got to think like them, to also protect yourself. So, just thinking like that. So, what do you think?
You got to think like them, but you also have to understand how people work in the aggregate as well. The individual and the aggregate are two different things in terms of how those things manifest. And data tells a story, but sometimes the story that you're telling can be a bit, it might fit, but it may not be the whole picture. So what I'm trying to get at is that, yes, to say if there's a downturn, you'll see an increase in fraudulent attacks, and you can ascribe, and I love that word because that's the truth here. You're ascribing what can be the possible things that are related that cause this. Could it be more people are more desperate so they turn to fraud, or is it that they're more desperate so therefore they're more susceptible to being accomplice to fraud without knowing, being unwitting mules and whatnot? And a good example would be, look what happened with COVID and the lockdown. It wasn't so much that there was a downturn, although there were some people who were more desperate for money in certain situations. But the story there was more on the fact that everything had to go online. And also, people had more time and people were more exposed online. And so, all these things combined to see such a huge increase in terms of just basic, old school tactics of kiting, meaning you're taking fraudulent checks that aren't supported, and you're going to do a mobile deposit on your phone because at that time they raised the limits because people weren't going to the banks to accommodate. And so you're getting $500 or $1,000 or whatever the bank was allowing at that time in terms of the upfront credit. And then people were kiting that money, meaning the money's available. They would siphon it out elsewhere before it would return back. That's an old trick. For decades, it's always been around. Whether it's ATMs, you would do that. But the opportunity rose, and the context was that everyone was online. The banks had to change their policies to accommodate what was going on. So context is everything. And so all these things just combine as a confluence of why you see these different manifestations of increases of fraud attacks, certain kind of tactics resurfacing. And, it comes down to a lot of things. People were home a lot, people were more available, people were more vulnerable, everything was online. The whole landscape was changing. And that's why you saw, in part, a huge rise in these different types of scams. It's just a new iteration of that type of scam being employed.
Far in the future, like, what do you see as AI? A lot is changing with AI. Like, what would you say are the good things that AI will be able to do? And you could just be speculative on this. And what are the horrifying things that it will do in like the fintech space? Like, what are the good and the bad things? Like, good thing might be that it can buy stuff for you. You're running low on stuff. It knows so much about you. It knows you need almond milk. on Wednesday. That I guess like where's your mind go with AI just because it's moving so fast?
Sure. And my mind's going so fast in a lot of different directions right now as we speak. Because number one, I'm not an expert on AI, and of course, AI is the topic du jour and it's on everyone's mind. But I'm not following it religiously in terms of all the ins and outs and where things are going. And I should. I'm more cloistered at the moment in terms of focusing on my silo
Yeah.
of fraud and risk, right? But just taking a step back, looking more broadly at I see it just like any other tool that we've ever had or any new mode of how we orient and how we think and how we interact. Look at the early days of the internet. This is one of the things I studied when I was at Stanford. An interesting case where we looked at how evangelizing people were about how the internet was going to change everything and that the internet was going to be meaning more information out there and collaborative economies and people working together. And it was true anecdotally, that's how people were using it, but that's because those were certain kinds of people who were being drawn to the early part of the internet that wasn't accessible to everybody. And so, that was the vision. That's how it was seen. Those were the views, those were the biases. And then, we can look back now and we can definitely see that while that part could be true, it's certainly overshadowed more by, say, the ill effects of how we connect with the internet. Social media is a good example in terms of it's actually end up being ironic where we have more and more access to information. But instead, what has happened is that instead we tend to have customized sort of our feeds and self-reinforcing sort of activities and messages. And so now we see the world the way we want to see it, as opposed to actually being exposed to more information, which the idea at that time would have been that, oh, this is going to be utopia. More people are more informed, therefore we're going to have a better society. That's not been the case. And so I think of AI along the same lines, meaning it can be good, but it can certainly be bad. It's going to take lessons in histories in terms of how are we going to foresee that this can be used for good and for bad? What are the ups? What are the downs? And how can we get ahead of it in terms of steering this to be introduced in society in the most productive and positive and best way? And how can we anticipate and mitigate? And how can we preempt? How can we fathom how this is going to be misused in a bad way? Where are the ill effects? And so, I think as long as you have those discussions up front before AI becomes so proliferated, hopefully we can learn lessons from the past and understand what are the possible long-term negative side effects and do our best to do it. But at the same time, in the day, just like anything else in history, this is just a new tool that augments you in terms of the best things and the worst things. So what's really different? So yeah, now you get off of that philosophical discussion. It's more about, where are the cool things and what are the bad things. There is the utopian vision, like the Star Trek the Star Trek economy, in terms of, well, what if most activities can be done by AI and by robots, and that humans themselves are relegated and no longer have to employ that kind of labor. And maybe we have a universal basic income. I mean, that's been studied by the very people who are actually at the forefront of AI because they understood this well in advance. These are implications that we're going to have to deal with to transform society. How can we control that? What does that look like? So maybe people were more, dedicating themselves to the arts, and that's the good side. But what are the bad sides? And so you're going to see a huge shift in terms of what do people do when they have more time? And I think, to me, that's one of the biggest implications of AI is, what are you going to do when more people have more time? And that's going to be a very interesting manifestation at societal level and an economic level, a world stability perspective, and just look at the way AI is being used now too at a military level. And just look at how drones are also reshaping the way battles are fought now. And so certainly these things have drastic transformations of the way things used to be done, for good and bad.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I mean, we could go on honestly another hour, I feel like, talking about fraud and talking about all of this stuff. Where should people go to learn more about you if they're interested in learning more about fraud or just this topic?
I'm just a normal person with a LinkedIn, nothing fancy. So if anyone's curious, they can look there and reach out anytime. As anyone can probably tell from listening to this podcast, I'm eager and excited to talk about anything. Reach out. I'm happy to talk.
This was a great episode, and yeah, we'll be in touch.
All right, take care.
Awesome. Thank
Bye.
you so much.